Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Vulnerability Response, Success Strategies, Planning, and the Customer Journey. I'm Tim Lee with Cerna Solutions, and one of the reasons we are excited to do this webinar today is because we've been talking to a lot of customers that have questions about vulnerability response, and a lot of customers that are looking to solve some new security problems with some new technology. And we are joined by our distinguished panel. I'll just introduce the Cerna and ServiceNow people for right now, and I'll jump into to our other guests in just a minute. But right now we're joined by Tim Kristen with ServiceNow and Josh Tessero with Cerna Solutions. Real quick, by way of introduction, guys, could you just give us a little bit of background about what you do in the ServiceNow space? I'll start with Tim.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Kristen. I'm a security and risk specialist in ServiceNow. So for all topics security and in IRM related, I'm responsible for.
Fantastic. And Josh, can you go ahead, just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm the practice lead at Cerna Solutions for security and risk. So kind of work tightly with Tim on helping customers kind of achieve success when, dealing with various products and tools, specifically ServiceNow.
Yeah, and I'll say Josh is definitely my go-to when I have questions about security and integrations. So we're very excited to have both of you guys with us here today. And we're excited about our guest as well. Like I said, I'll get into that in just 1 minute. But before that, I just want to handle some, just want to handle some quick housekeeping. A question that we get very often is this session being recorded? And will it be sent to me? Yes, we will be recording this session. We will be emailing it out to you. You will most likely also be able to find it on the Cerna Solutions website, on our YouTube channel, and we will be sending that out on LinkedIn. So if you're not already following Cerna on LinkedIn, it's a great chance for you to do that. However, if you do have questions during this session, please feel free to use that Q&A feature, the Q&A module on the Zoom panel. Don't do chat. I think it's just a lot easier for us to monitor the Q&A portion, and chat generally gets a little bit mixed up. So that's really the best way. I would not wait to ask your question. We will try to handle it as soon as possible. If we can integrate that into our current conversation, we'll be happy to interject and get your questions answered as soon as possible. And it really helps our conversation go better for everyone if you guys participate that way, and we see a lot of success with that. So I'm very excited to move forward. Just by way of agenda, we're going to give you a really brief introduction on vulnerability response. I imagine you already have the 101 understanding of what that is, but we're going to get a little bit more into some of the specifics, get some of the perspectives of why it's a unique offering from ServiceNow. But we're also going to be talking to our honored guests today from APS. They have done a successful vulnerability response implementation, and we're going to pick their brain a little bit about what that was like for them, what were their lessons learned, and give you that insight of just seeing what it was like to pull this off successfully and what that might take for you if that's something that you're considering. And then finally, we're going to talk just a little bit more about how to get the most out of your VR implementation. When I say VR, I'm obviously referring to vulnerability response. I know sometimes it gets mixed up with virtual reality, but when I say VR from this point out, we'll just assume that's what I'm talking about right now. But let's go ahead and move real quick into why ServiceNow for vulnerability response. And I'll send that over to Tim and to Josh. Tim, from your perspective, I mean, why do you think right now that ServiceNow has a unique offering in that solution space?
Sure, there's three really big things that ServiceNow brings to vulnerability response. And you can kind of take each of these in its own swim lane, as it were. First, put all of your vulnerability response data in one place. Secondly, attach workflows to those, whether they're out-of-the-box workflows from ServiceNow or ones you design yourself. And then thirdly, create service-level agreements to go around all of those workflows so you can kind of get the undue burden off of security teams and back to the stakeholders that are really responsible for this across the organization. So I would say those are the three big things that help us transform teams and transform current cultures.
Yeah, And Josh, what about you? I mean, from your perspective, really more on the partner side, what have you seen that's exciting about this space?
Yeah, I mean, Tim said it really well. I mean, I would add on to that from a tool capability perspective. You know, organizations as security becomes a larger and larger focus, or struggle to address all of the things that they have coming at them from many different directions, right? And figuring out what to address is really the hardest thing. And ServiceNow does a wonderful job of helping you drive really robust risk and prioritization metrics around your vulnerabilities, and then group those together in logical ways that you can resolve them. So there's some real efficiency that teams can see, and hopefully Sean and APS can tell us a little bit about that, but there's some real efficiency teams can see through leveraging the tool on top of their existing kind of environment.
Yeah, I think that what I see a lot when talking to customers is they're still using spreadsheets, and that's ultimately there's no shame in admitting that you're still using spreadsheets because it's still so widespread. But when we look at the security space today, you hear a lot of people say that it's a moving target. And I'm good at Excel, and I wouldn't want to build an Excel spreadsheet that can hit a moving target. I don't think I know how to do that. So yeah, I think that's a perfect way to sum up what we're talking about today. Next, let me go ahead and introduce our guests. We're joined today by Sean Cunningham with APS. And Sean, I'll throw it to you first, and if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your team.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate you guys inviting us to share our journey at APS. I'm joined by Joseph Maloney and Tyler Anderson. Both are cybersecurity risk analysts on the cybersecurity risk management team at APS. And these two are two of the main reasons why we're at where we're at today. If some of the folks on the call attended the virtual Knowledge 2020, we had a presentation there, and these two gentlemen were the primary ones that were presenting our vulnerability response implementation.
Fantastic. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and it's, as far as the journey is concerned, what I'd like to cover today briefly is that talk touched very little on top of what some of the metrics that drive conversations. But it did talk about some of the challenges, and we talk about the challenges because the journey that we went through over a period of about 2.5 years was not just implementing the integration between ServiceNow and Tenable through vulnerability response, but it took place much sooner, where we were engaging with our business partners to show them, what risks were associated with the applications and services that they rely on. At APS, we break our systems down into business and mission critical systems. The business systems are largely systems like payroll, procurement, those systems that support the mission. The mission, in the case of a public utility, is to ensure that we're delivering power safely. Those are the most critical assets that we have to make sure that we're protecting. And it's once we started having these conversations, we quickly realized that we didn't necessarily have good correlated data, or the data that we had was not necessarily holistic. And that's where the power of this tool really shines. For all the vulnerability management solutions that are out there, such as Qualys and Tenable and some others, they're very good at scanning networks, but it's not necessarily aggregating that data and in putting it in a digestible fashion that can be quickly disseminated to the asset owners for remediation. And that's when those metric conversations, when you go back and have those conversations after this tool is in, it becomes a data-driven conversation, not an emotional one. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, and for everyone that might not already be aware, I just put into the chat a link to the K20 presentation that he's talking about. Definitely save that link, put that somewhere and watch it later. They do a great job, about 20 minutes of going into how they set up ServiceNow, how they set up vulnerability response, and really what they're doing to kind of lead the charge in this type of process. And so if you have questions about that, that will answer a lot of them for you. We may get into some of those questions here, and if you have them, obviously you can put them in the Q&A, but this will also probably save you a lot of time and answer a lot of those questions for you as well. Well, that's awesome. So, and how long have you guys been on ServiceNow?
We've been on ServiceNow for over 10 years. We were one of the first couple hundred customers. Wow. And we used it as a classic work management tool. the IT work is still performed and orchestrated through this tool. But we've really started to expand, starting with the vulnerability response tool from our workspace from the security perspective. We also use the ServiceNow GRC tool, the performance analytics, as well as the vendor risk management tool. All of those and most of our processes at APS within the security department have all been migrated into ServiceNow. So there's very few processes that we execute with a level of rapidity that are not included or not been ported over in some automated fashion into ServiceNow.
Okay. Well, so let's do this right now. I've kind of broken down a little bit of the customer process in terms of making decisions. And what I want to do here, and I'll break this down, is really briefly just talk a little bit more about identifying the need, sort of going into the problem that you had that required you to look for this type of solution. Talk a little bit more about what that decision-making process was like, and then really jump a little bit more into the implementation itself. Again, talking more about those lessons learned, what did you do well, and kind of giving people the that invaluable insight of what that looks like. So just jumping in first, as far as identifying need, I mean, what would you say was really the core problem, or the major deciding factor that made you look into this?
The inability to address vulnerabilities in a rapid fashion and ensure that we're assigning those identified vulnerabilities to our assets and the asset owners in a quick fashion. Sure, we could address the critical items, but we weren't nearly at the depth or breadth that we needed to. We were working from, quite frankly, from spreadsheets, data extractions from Tenable, taking that data, analyzing it, collecting it together, creating a manual ticket in ServiceNow, attaching that spreadsheet, and then assigning it to the asset owners that we believed had the capability of remediating them. So that definitely was, I think, the biggest identifying need. Our desire, when we really recognized we needed to do something different, it was about 2 years ago, maybe a little over 2 years ago, when we went to Knowledge 2018, and we brought with it what kind of like we started with what do we want the future to look like, and so we built out that view and brought that with us and started having conversations with ServiceNow folks, with other companies, looked at how other companies are implementing the technology. And bear in mind that VR at the time, I believe, was fairly new. It was maybe just 6 months to a year old. And there wasn't a lot of business cases out there that demonstrated where we wanted to go. So we were somewhat starting early adopters, if you will. And through that process, we made some mistakes. We did some integration decisions that ultimately we had to undo, had to do some rework. And that wasn't for the lack of, desire or it was a lack of experience, quite frankly, with my team. And so they had to take a step back and take a look at really dig into the tool. And that's part of the decision process to do this, is do you have the right people? The technology, anybody can buy a tool, anybody can implement the tool, but do you have the people in place to ensure that success? And so it took the team about, I would say, probably a year to get to know the tool, to get to know the integrations, to learn how the matching rules from Tenable through VR occurred, to ensure that you're, quite frankly, you're assigning the vulnerability to the right group. And what it also will do for you, it will tease out inaccuracies within your CMDB. Hey, why am I getting these vulnerabilities when Steve over here should get them? Well, it's because the information that you have in the CMDB is not accurate. And so consequently, it drives a different level of conversation, not just related to vulnerabilities, but to the CMDB accuracy and efficacy.
And I think that's a great point. I think that someone came in and actually had that question right off the bat for us, which was, how much of your success was based on your CMDB maturity? And on your video, you had talked about how that was kind of an unexpected challenge for you, was, the gaps in the CMDB information. What was that process like for you guys in terms of trying to overcome that?
what is the process like? It's continual. When
Yeah,
we see, if an asset owner says, hey, how come this is not accurate? You're giving me these vulnerabilities when it should go to maybe the application team. It's because your business services are not properly mapped to the assets, and vice versa. So it really becomes, when we have these conversations, when we recognize something like this, we have to make sure that we're prescriptively telling the CMDB owner or the CI owner what corrections they can make so that this doesn't occur again. And ultimately, we are not the arbiters of the CMDB. This is owned by IT. We are not part of IT. So we too are customers of the CMDB. So it's really taking, whenever those instances you see that you are making self-corrections along the way, it doesn't happen overnight. It hasn't been completed at APS. We still have a lot of work to do, but now that is a data-driven conversation, whereas before it was, quite frankly, more of an emotional one. Now we have actual examples that we can show them, point to, so that they can make corrections.
Yeah. So when we talk about the decision-making process, I think that one of the things that comes up all the time is getting the right decision makers on board. Was that a process for you, and how did you approach kind of getting the right people in line with making a 1-year commitment to getting something implemented?
The decision process to move forward with this was, quite frankly, because our program could not reach the level of maturity that we desired for that end state. Mm-hmm. And the only way we could get to that point through the old saying of people, process, and technology. I know I had good team members on my team. We've been growing that team over a period of years. Several of them are former interns, and they've been with us for 5-6 years in this case. We had the processes documented, we had the policies in place, but we lacked the technology to take it to the rapidity that we had to put it on, like a turbo, if you will. And we couldn't get there without that. So the decision-making process was a relatively easy one. The ROI on the investment into moving forward with vulnerability response was a no-brainer. And then, because then you can take that information, once you have that integration in place and you know it works and you can see that it's working, then you can start to have not just a high-level metric that measures adherence to your SLAs, but then you can start measure how am I patching each one of our critical assets as a business service itself. And then you share those reports with each executive for his or her business applications and show them, well, this is why things are slipping or why things are doing well. And then you have those same conversations with IT. Your challenges are still here. Your assets are not necessarily correct in the CMDB, or you have applications that are installed on your assets that may not be patched with the rapidity that they need to be, such as Java and Adobe and all the different debt load that a lot of companies struggle with, not just us. And then the operating systems, making sure that they are using the automation that is available to them through satellite or SCCM and that technology that will allow them to have technology that can support quite frankly, the absolute need to remediate vulnerabilities as quickly as they possibly can. I hope that answered the question. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so why don't we, instead of talking about it, let's show it real quick. I think that talking a little bit more about what the implementation process was for you. We want to show off a little bit of how you had put this together, give your team a chance to talk a little bit more about what they had done. You mentioned having the right people in place and what their process was.
Sure.
So let's go ahead and jump into that.
Okay, so it starts with what we call our cybersecurity vulnerability response dashboard. And I'm going to clear this filter right here, and what you're going to see when I clear that is a metric in red. This metric is in red because it's below the threshold. The threshold is supposed to be 97%. That is the agreed upon SLA that IT agrees to meet for all the critical, the standard, and the high SLA related vulnerabilities. That is for 2 days for critical, 14 days for high, and then 60 days for standard. Currently, they are at 92%. However, if you really want to know how they're performing, because this is set for January 1st of 2020, because that is when the SLA, for us, that was our kickoff point, if you will, with IT. Even though we were using it prior, this was our agreement on the date when we would start the SLA. However, if you look at the 12-month rolling average is really where they're really performing. They're at about 80%. And then I'll kind of dive into why that is occurring. And it just recently, because of this number and this number, we were able to bring some observations to some senior leaders from IT, showing them, you're not going to meet your metric if you don't make some substantive changes very quickly. And here's the reason why. And it was because of this integration that we were able to have that level of mature conversation with them rather than more of an emotional one. This was a data-driven conversation. Once they saw the data, it became easy. So the first and foremost, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this, and then I'm going to kind of turn over some of the questions to Tyler Anderson and Joseph Maloney, and maybe ask them to share some of their experiences. So first and foremost, we have 3 different areas that we can select from: the assignment group, the CI class name, and the business service breakdown. If you want to see, first and foremost, when you come to this dashboard, there's 6 panels. This is the tier 3 metric. This is the total count of vulnerabilities. This is the total count that has missed the target. Here are top 10 vulnerabilities that we are seeing approaching their target. This is the 12-month rolling average. Then if you click on my group's work, this will show you specific areas of work that is literally in your queue that is assigned to your team. And you can build it however you choose to build it. That's the beauty of the dashboard and the performance analytics engine that comes along with it. And then from a manager's perspective, I want to see the stuff that's approaching, that's about to go either breach or has breached, and then find out why that is occurring. I'm not going to click on this one because this report takes a long time to load, but it's basically a table format that shows all the vulnerability groups assigned to each frontline leader and broken down by critical assets. And then we have a critical asset grouping that takes all of our business mission critical systems, gives an overall metric, the number of vulnerabilities that are past due, this kind of a trend line here, and then a breakdown of most of the defined business, what we call business or mission critical services. Then what you can do, so this kind of drives, again, the team's work. Then you get into what, quite frankly, the senior leadership cares about, is those things that are defined business services and, quite frankly, are defined as mission critical. So if I type in something like PyProd, that is a system that we use at APS for telemetry information on our power plants. And once I pull that up, first off, I can see right away that they're at 98% patching to the metric, which is very good. Only 5 have breached the remediation timeline. And you can, by the way, you can do the same thing here on this screen and this screen, and it will give you the same number, but it will tell you on this screen the total number of vulnerabilities associated with those assets. And bear in mind, when I say assets, I mean the servers, the databases, the application itself that make up that service. And then what their 12-month rolling average. And that's really good. You can see that the dispersion rate between those two is almost negligible, which is really what you want. So this helps kind of drive that conversation as I spoke to, and lets teams, the thing I like about the tier 3 metric, but I don't like about it, is it masks areas of trouble. So if your management team is not paying attention, they may not know where the laggards are pulling, why things are being pulled down. You can clearly see in some of the instances, we will look at critical statistics, what some of those areas are. We have applications that are performing. Here's one that's at 38%, here's one that's 53%, here's at 62%. And most of those themes we were able to identify due to a manual versus an automated patching function. So we had decision points by certain support teams to say, we want to manually patch, we don't want to use automation because we're fearful that we may cause an unintended outage. Well, if that's the case, then you still have to adhere to your SLA. So do you have processes in place to ensure that you can meet that obligation? And this is really starting to change that conversation from just the tier 3, you know, and bear in mind, what is in tier 3? We all have, like, I have 60,000, we have 60,000 managed assets at APS. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a lot. For some of the organizations on the call, that's probably a gnat. But at APS, of that 60,000, probably a quarter of those are desktop endpoint devices. That is the layup of vulnerability management. In other words, you can patch those. If you break a few, okay, we can re-image them, but you should never miss on a desktop vulnerability because you can patch repeatedly, and you can use automation to do so. The servers is where, you know, again, you get teams that, support teams that get nervous. But this number here, like I'm saying, I use a term about desktops and I say that it's the high tide that raises all boats. So it is masking, because it's relatively easy again, it is masking the overall performance of IT within this number. It's not revealing it. And so it is not until you start to have these data-driven conversations with senior IT leaders and the asset owners about why things are slipping, but more importantly, why they're slipping in their specific area. And so that's where it really, the power of the tool really comes to life.
And were these dashboards, this is a question that came in, were these out of box with VR, or was this something that you had to customize and set up yourself?
No, I'm going to let Joseph Maloney, who is the author, along with Tyler Anderson. There are two main guys that work in this program, and Joseph has done most of the development work of this dashboard. And so this takes a lot of hard work. You can use the out-of-the-box stuff, but bear in mind, it's out of the box. It's not customized for your business. It's not customized for how you do business. And so that's where you really need to learn the tool and be kind to yourself and not try to adopt and bite off too much too soon. So Joseph, do you want to answer some of those, kind of give us your overview of that?
Yeah, so in this case, the whole dashboard is all customized. We built all the automated indicators and the calculated indicators, the percentages, the breakdowns, all of that. However, the tool does offer a lot of the out-of-the-box reporting it comes with that performance analytics package. The main thing that we notice is, since we have been using ServiceNow for so long, there was a lot of things we were not doing out of the box, and that ended up us needing to build something specifically catered to our company and how we work.
Thank you, Joseph. And one more thing that we might want to show them, and Tyler, if you want to speak to this, we all remember, and we always, you know, when we have these what we call accelerated high impact vulnerabilities that hit us, they come on fast. We have to react quickly. And so I'll give an example. In 2017, when the shadow brokers vulnerabilities were exposed, or tool sets were exposed, there were massive vulnerabilities that were exposed within those tool sets. And most organizations that owned Windows assets, which is just about 99.9% of us, had to act quickly. In the case of that particular vulnerability, it took the company at the time about, I want to say, 75 to 80 days to patch our Windows assets. Wow. While that sounds not horrible, in the case of something as bad as that is certainly not optimum. And so when we implemented this tool, we wanted a way of tracking those high velocity type tickets so that we could see how we're performing as a company and as an IT group and as a security team, to see where things are falling down and where maybe we need to focus some attention. So Tyler, do you want to talk about this briefly?
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much covered it. But yeah, I would like to echo that this is the accelerated patching is probably some of my favorite functionality that we've had through this. We've been through Heartbleed and yeah, with the WannaCry vulnerabilities, right? And just going through those exercises without something like vulnerability response, it's pretty much a constant week of creating spreadsheets and sending those out to various business stakeholders who want to know whether their applications are impacted and what the risk is, right? Being able to set up one dashboard in maybe an hour worth of work that kind of updates all that information in real time. Remediation teams who are working on fixing stuff can run scans to update the numbers in near real time, and we can do kind of hourly imports to provide those updates to the business stakeholders. It definitely made this last round of the accelerated patching, when we had that last critical vulnerability come out of the NSA, I think. When that came out, it really helped in addressing those vulnerabilities.
And as you can see with this dashboard, we have various panels. This one covers the count of group assignments. This one is the count of affected systems. And the stuff on the bottom are closed, the stuff on the top, maybe we had a re-imaged system or something that was stuck in a drawer. So this is desktop services, so I can clearly tell that this is an endpoint device. It was probably in a drawer, probably wasn't patched because we couldn't even detect it, and the automated patching tools couldn't even see it. So more than likely that's probably what we're dealing with here, but it lets you see, to Tyler's point, immediate visibility as to how things are performing. And to Tyler's earlier point, literally we were sending spreadsheets to the IT asset teams that did the patching. They were pulling reports from their systems. We were correlating them in trying to find out where are our deltas, and hey, do you guys have this system? Do you have this server on your list? How come we do and you don't? So it really, it's not what we call a smooth orchestration. This really raises the bar. And so it provides that information and actionable information, not only to us, but the asset owners themselves.
Do you find that this like increased visibility, right, and the really robust dashboarding you've created is driving kind of more, call it organization-wide adoption? Are people more receptive to the conversation because it's more visible?
Yes and no. At first, it drives, so I don't know the 7 stages of acceptance, or whatever it is, the 6 stages. I don't know if it's 6 or 5 or whatever, but everybody starts out with first denial, then you get to anger, right? And then it eventually, when you have enough of them and you don't use the blame game, but you say, hey, this is what the data is showing us. What can we do to help you? And one of the things that my director always fosters, how can security help you? We're really big into not just throwing things over, pointing out through the dashboard what the problems are, but really partnering with them and providing each of our partners, whether it's on the business side or IT, on our expertise and maybe methodologies that can be used to improve their response. So it's not perfect, but the conversations continue to happen. We've probably done between one-on-ones, team meetings, special sessions, well into the hundreds. And that has been occurring over just the last year. But it's something that has really fostered and engendered from my leadership, and because of the really strong partnerships that he's developed at the VP level, and that my team and myself developed at more the frontline level, it's making significant impact and input. We probably had 7 or 8 meetings last week with specific teams going over data within the dashboard and not looking at the holistic stuff, really diving into what is driving their area specifically. And then saying, all right, so when we look at the vulnerabilities, if I type in a system as an example, SWIMS is a work management solution we use at Palo Verde. Palo Verde is the largest nuclear power plant in the United States, one of the largest in the world. We can see that there are vulnerabilities and then those things that are past the target. If I look at the past the target items, when I dive into that, I can do a comparison. And then if I shift the day back to say, let's say to April 1st, I can see that in this data that nothing has moved out since April 1st, because these are all past due, right? Had I pulled up the other ones, which was the 70 or so, that are all current vulnerabilities, and then also those that have breached, I might be able to see some that have actually moved out of that number. But you can dive into the data and kind of get, just by scanning it, I can see you guys are struggling with Java, and we looked and we have a lot of Linux kernel stuff that has not been applied. And the question is why? Well, I can tell you it's because our Linux-based systems largely don't use automated patching. They use manual patching. And with, as I mentioned to my team, I'm a big stickler on process. To me, if I ask my team to each make a cake for me and I don't provide a recipe, I'm going to get 7 different variants of a cake.
Sure.
Well, I like the same cake and I like a process. And so this is, to me, is a recognition that when I have this conversation with these guys from IT and teams like this, I will ask them, what is holding you back from using the automation? Is it fear? Mm-hmm. Measure your process. Tell me where your concerns are so that we can share those along with yourself with the teams that can help you leverage, in this case, Red Hat Satellite. And then maybe overcome some of those fears. Start with the dev systems. All right, are we seeing things working after it's been applied? You know, moving on to the QA systems and the test systems. Finally, before we get to the production systems. But more importantly, you know, do you have alignment with the business on the maintenance outages that are required to be able to apply patching? Those conversations cannot be delayed and they cannot not be had, because the business ultimately has to agree to those outages. And if they understand what the risk is versus what we're trying to remediate and why, in most cases they're going to give it to you. Now, certainly in the context of a nuclear power plant, we're not going to take certain systems down that are plant critical during an outage. You just can't do it. So there are going to be certain times that you know, obviously the business operations are going to dictate the rapidity or the desires of IT and security to remediate things quickly.
Now, what do you think in terms of, you know, coming through on the other side of this? What do you wish you had known on day one that you know now?
I'm gonna answer that, and then I'm gonna let Joseph and Tyler kind of get their spin on it. From my perspective, we didn't know what we didn't know. This was a new tool. It required a whole new way of thinking, of looking at the data, and I'm somebody that is always in a desire to move quicker. The one thing I heard and I took away from the conversations I heard at Knowledge and at the Tenable conference is don't try to sprint. Take it slowly, map out what your problems are, map out what you want your end state to look like. And bear in mind, we're not there yet. You know, we're still trying to achieve what our end state may look like. But map that out, be patient. You're going to make mistakes. Self-correct when you identify them quickly. Listen to your team. I am a leader. I am nothing more than a functionary. Listen to the people on your team, what help they need, whether it's training, whether it's, you know, having maybe a senior leadership meetings where you can drive some of the desire why we need to change, to move away from spreadsheets and do it in a more automated fashion. If you lay those things out in a data-driven conversation with clear targets and measurements that you can demonstrate, I think you'll get the support you need. If you go in with an emotional one, that, well, I need it because we need it. Well, you know, senior leaders don't like to give money unless they know what they're investing in and why. So that would be my viewpoint. Tyler?
Sure.
Hey, yeah, I think you touched on it most of the stuff that we wish we would have known when we were initially implementing. A lot of our assignments are based on dependency and service mapping within ServiceNow. So specifically that, I think if we could have put a little bit more focus on trying to true up some of that dependency mapping between servers and the applications that they support, we probably would have had a little bit of an easier time doing some of the grouping rules and assignments initially. Since we did a pretty big import initially, that kind of resulted in a lot of stuff being assigned not necessarily incorrectly, but based on the CMDB data that really needed to be updated. And then there was a decent amount of work to go back through and kind of reassign some of that stuff. Since then, I mean, that effort did put a lot of focus on the CMDB, so I think it helped a lot, and we did get a lot of movement in correcting some of the stuff that we identified. But we likely could have identified some of those problems before the import and saved us a little bit of time reassigning and doing a little bit of the rework. But that is one thing that while it cost us some time internally, it really did shine a light on some of the areas where we needed some improvement. So it's a little bit of a hardship for us, but also almost a value added in itself that we were unable to be able to show that, hey, we're unable to assign X amount of vulnerabilities and it represents this amount of risk. We really need to put some focus into addressing these particular issues within the CMDB in order to be able to do that properly.
Joseph, how about you?
Yeah, I think it's a similar challenge. Also CMDB related is how we manage assets in general, what information is in there and how up to date that information is. The moment that we are trying to match a vulnerability with a specific CI, we encounter a lot of issues there because you know, normally they want you to do something on like IP, but if you reuse IPs, you might match to something that has been retired, or you may have possibility of multiple matches. So again, it's really understanding how you're managing your configuration items. How are those relationships to network adapters or router interfaces, and all those little details. The more you understand the underlying structure of your configuration items, the better you're going to be able to match that information coming from your scanner. I feel like that was one area that we struggled at the beginning. I think we underestimated how much difficulty we will end up doing. So at the end, we ended up using about 10 sequential rules in order to match to configuration items, you know, starting with the DNS name and going all the way down to the last one is like an exact match on IP.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But I think that was, again, CMDB, the quality of your CMDB is going to drive a lot of the success. But like Tyler said, this tool also is going to drive quality of the CMDB because nobody likes vulnerabilities assigned to them that they don't have to resolve. And once you prove to them that this is assigned based on data that they maintain, they will update it.
Yeah, well, I think that's super valuable insight, if I'm being honest. And knowing what you guys know now, knowing about the large investment that this was, and the, you know, both financial and time investment, would you, on the other side, would you say it was all worth it?
Well, I can tell you my boss definitely thinks so, because I 3-4 years ago, I could not address to the level of his desire of remediation because we couldn't identify vulnerabilities in the breadth and depth that we do today. Bear in mind that much of what you see is a lot of it is on what we call the corporate network, or the Wild Wild West. Because we are a utility and what we have to protect matters most is delivering power to people's homes. We have a very complex network. We have about 60 domains. We don't have visibility in all of them. We still got work to do. But without this investment, we couldn't take care of, you know, and really have a good feeling about what our security posture was at the moment. And that's not a comfortable conversation for a director to have with a VP. You
Sure.
want to make sure that those investments we're making, because ultimately, the customer, a lot of those costs end up in customers. It has to be something that we can justify. And in this case, reducing risk to our company inherently reduces risk to our customers, to the insurance that we can meet our obligation of delivering power safely and quickly. So absolutely 100% the best. I've been in this role for 8 years. This is by far the best investment, I feel, that an outcome that we've ever had for the technologies that we are responsible for.
Great. Yeah, and we have a few more questions that have come through the Q&A. I do want to get to some of those, but before that, I wanted to talk a little bit more to the team about the implementation process itself. What we've seen in terms of what do people need to know? What are kind of the questions they need to have? Just so that everyone's aware, just like the video that I had thrown up earlier about the K20 presentation from APS, I just now put in a link to a document for a PDF. This is something we'll also provide to you by email afterward, which is somewhat of a VR implementation guide. It's a chance for you to ask the right questions and kind of check the right boxes to get you more strategy. You can't say it'll take you A to Z, but it's definitely a great start to set yourself off on the right foot for your VR implementation. But talking to that a little bit, Josh, I know that you had kind of set aside some areas that people should be focusing on for these types of implementations. Can you speak a little bit more to what that process is like and what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so typically, the first thing we're going to do is go in and have a conversation, obviously, with the stakeholders to understand, what is the process today, and specifically, how do we identify, and I think Sean's team talked to us a little bit, but how do we identify for a given vulnerability on a given asset, who's responsible for remediating it? And a lot of times that's something that's kind of tribal knowledge at organizations, so it's one of the things we kind of highlighted in the readiness guide. And what we do is we give this to people that are looking at vulnerability response, and we say, the more of these things that you can kind of get your arms around, right, and begin to understand, what does this mean to me, the kind of fewer questions we have to answer as part of the implementation, so it makes things go a little smoother. And, most organizations don't have the answers to all these things, that's okay, but the more items you can speak to, kind of the smoother and the higher maturity you're going to get out of the first implementation. The first round. So you can really kind of get quite a lot if you can answer some of these questions. And the big things are going to be, like I said, around understanding how things are assigned and remediated, understanding the footprint of your tool. So if you're using Tenable or Qualys or Rapid7, do you have comprehensive coverage across the environment? As Sean said, they're still working on that today, so that can be a really tremendous challenge for some organizations. But understanding at least where your blind spots are is a good start. And then, from a CMDB perspective, a bunch of people were asking about, hey, what level of maturity or completeness or correctness do we need from a CMDB perspective to be successful? And the answer is, vulnerability response is always going to move the needle for you. You can have a non-existent CMDB. Your scanner will bring in assets as you turn it on. It'll give you a nice place to start, right, even if you don't have another source. So you can always move the needle. That being said, your scanner may or may not, unless you configure it, it's not going to know who owns the things and some of the information around maybe compliance impact, PCI environment, et cetera. So the more things we can do to kind of drive some of that maturity into the CMDB, the better. You're going to get, a more mature outcome. So it's kind of, you get out what you put in, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking to that CMDB, that was a lot of the questions that we got coming in, were people still saying, how mature does this have to be? What do you think in terms of if someone says they have a healthy CMDB and they implement this process, how big of a change is that going to be for how they're managing that CMDB? I know it's kind of a weird question, but if I guess if we're saying that people are generally happy, is it still going to be a change for them, or is it going to be business as usual?
Well, the tool will reveal those areas that have inaccuracies. That's for certain.
Yep.
And that once you're able to do that, then you can start to have those conversations. And bear in mind that the conversations that you really want to drive with IT teams initially, remember we talked about the 5 stages of acceptance. We would have these conversations where IT teams would say, well, we don't want to patch. Well, Okay, or we want to deviate, we want an exception. Okay, is the business aware of this? And do they understand what the risk is associated with that? Because ultimately it is not your role or job to accept risk for the organization related to the business. The business has to accept that. So we have a process built in ServiceNow that relates, it's captured in the GRC module, where we capture risks and associated exceptions to vulnerabilities. Those have to be signed off on. The lowest level is a director. In most cases, any risk that is above a 2.1 on a scale of 4, that has to be signed off by a VP. So at that point, you're having the conversation for risk acceptance at the right level. The CMDB can reveal some of those problem areas that we talked about earlier, where assets, to Joseph's earlier point, where vulnerabilities are not being assigned correctly or to the right group. Hey, let's have that conversation. Have you bothered to look at your, you have currently these 10 applications. You seem to have a pretty good idea on your production systems, but we're seeing significant lag and vulnerabilities being remediated on your dev, QA, test. Are those mapped equivalently to your production systems? And because we think they're not. And so it drives that conversation. We've had recent conversation where parts of IT want to renegotiate the SLA. And I'm saying, I'm not going there. I'm happy to have a conversation where you can show me the data, why you can't currently meet the SLA, and what schedules and processes you have in place to meet that. And if you show me, all right, during the summer in Arizona, number one, you can't take a plant down during Arizona in the summertime. You minimize that because it's hot. We produce a lot of power in the summers to keep people's ACs on. Those outages can become impedances to patching. Have you overlaid those outages with what your current schedule is and your assets? And if you can clearly show me that you can't do that, then fine. Let's have a conversation about adjusting the SLAs for a certain system or set of applications, but not holistically. We will never move off of the SLA that we currently have. I would like to become more aggressive. For desktops, I think the SLA should be 30 days. Period. Desktop, I'm not going to say this wrongly. It's not that I don't care. I do care. But a desktop, if I break somebody's desktop, I'll live with that. Okay. I do understand the hand-wringing that can occur with respect to business and mission critical systems and applications that run our business. But the CMDB, as I say to everybody on these discussions, if your CMDB has problems, it will reveal, vulnerability response will reveal them.
Yeah,
the CMDB
and that's a good point. I think that, we hear a lot of companies that just don't know how to handle CMDB. They don't really, even after they set it up, they're not even sure whether or not it's healthy. So having something in place that will help reveal that, I see that obviously as a plus. I do want to get through it. We have about 5 minutes left, and we had a few questions left here on our docket that if we have a moment, I'd like to try and pop into these. And I think if you guys had questions and we didn't get to them, go to the Q&A panel, because I see that we have answered quite a few of them via text. So that's a great place to go in and take a look. But Sean, for your team, how many resources did you have dedicated to vulnerability response?
My team is made up of 7 people. We manage risk, vulnerability management, as well as security awareness. Currently, I have I would say roughly 3 that work within the vulnerability response space, but they have other assignments. And they probably do about 50% of their work within vulnerability response. So if you do the math, it's about, I would say probably calculates to about 2 full-time out of the 7 people that work directly for me. Yeah.
And as we said, putting the right team together for the implementation is important. Obviously, putting the right team together for the operation is something completely different. It sounds like you guys definitely have a highly skilled team taking care of this, which is awesome. You mentioned that you guys have been on ServiceNow for about 10 years, and the question here is, how long did it take you to design, develop, and deploy the new VR system? You said it was about a year for you, but were there other steps involved that are worth going into?
Just briefly, first we had to stand up the scanning technology. We moved off of an old platform to Tenable. That took about a year. Then the implementation of VR took about a year. And then, quite frankly, about 6 months of that year were devoted to, once the integration was not that difficult. It was the refinement. Okay, we chose this field. Why don't we use this field instead? We're using these matching rules, refining those matching rules, developing the dashboards, the performance analytics, the executive reports. All of that took, and then communicating the OCM that took place and continues to take place is probably the hardest to overcome, because you have to meet and engage people on a one-on-one or a small team basis to get them to the point of understanding, so that they can be self-fulfilling for their success, rather than us constantly hand-holding them. Did that answer your question?
I assume probably did. Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
Just adding a note to that, we've Sean, your story's awesome, and I think you guys did pretty cool stuff with performance analytics, dashboards, and whatnot. I mean, we obviously implement with lots of customers, and we actually didn't help with Sean's implementation, but one of the things I want to call out is, we do see pretty standard implementation times tend to be 8 to 12 weeks for vulnerability response, so it is possible to achieve an outcome pretty quickly. That is excluding like the scanner setup time, so that's making the assumption that you've got Tenable or Qualys or Rapid7 scanning your environment today, but the ServiceNow piece can be pretty straightforward, and you can get some value pretty quickly, from an implementation.
Yeah. All right, well, guys, I think we're pretty much right up to time. I do want to take this time just to say thank you to everyone who participated, either if you joined us today as an audience member, or if you were on our panel. We greatly appreciate the time that you put into sharing with us today. Sean and your team, Tyler and Joseph, thank you guys so much. It was fantastic to hear your story. If you guys have any questions for APS, feel free to reach out to us at the contact information here. Tim Kristen was the ServiceNow rep that worked closely with them, and Cerna Solutions works a lot in the security operations space as well. So if you have questions about what those implementations are like and how we can help you out, definitely feel free and let us know. Again, in the chat, I put up a couple of links that are extremely valuable if you're interested in this topic. The link to the K20 presentation from APS on their process is invaluable. Seeing the way they set that up, they go into a lot more detail of their structure there and what that looks like. And as Tim C mentioned before, they really are leading the charge in terms of putting that type of process together for themselves. And there's also a link in there for the VR implementation guide. If you guys want to ask yourselves some more questions internally, get ready and try to shorten that process of getting implemented. That's a great way to give you the toolkit to get started. Josh, Tim, also, thank you guys for joining us and lending your expertise today. And everyone else, we will see you next time. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.